Peter, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm fine, thanks.
A pleasure. That beautiful accent of yours.
Well, you're very kind. I'm rather fond of yours as well.
Yeah.
Ours is proper down the country, Tipperary in Ireland. Have you ever been?
Oh, yeah, I was in Dunloch Bay not so long ago. So flew into Cork.
Yeah.
And went over to Dunloch Bay and Mizen Head.
No way.
And, yeah, had a couple of nights stay in hotels round there and spent time with the locals. It was wonderful because I was out there. Don't know if you can remember, but in 2007, there was a massive drugs importation and it all went horribly wrong for the bad guys just off of Mizen Head.
Yeah, did it wash up or...
Yeah, basically, I mean, it's a hysterical story.
Yeah, right, go on,
but it's got links very close to my home and potential links to the hunt for Kevin Parle, the fugitive from Liverpool that I've been looking for nearly 4 years. So 2007, a bunch of criminals, right, including a guy who lived 200 yards from my front door.
No.
Right, yeah. Used to be in the old Bill.
Oh,
right,
my
a geezer
God.
I knew called Mick Daly, right? Him and his cohorts go and buy a seafaring yacht down in the Caribbean and what have you. They fill it with 440 million euros worth of cocaine.
Okay, that's a lot.
So that's 1,500 kilos, a metric ton and a half of cocaine, right? And they sail it across the seas, okay, to a point where they get off of a couple of miles off of Mizen Head near Dunloch Bay, and they sail a rib out, so a rigid inflatable boat, a big, beefy, like twin-engined kind of speedboat sort of thing, you know, the sort of thing that the Coast Guard use.
Okay,
You know, we see them all these days, certainly in the UK, coming across the channel all the time with migrants on them, those kind of things. But this was a big, purpose-built, state-of-the-art, two mighty powerful engines on the back of it, which they launch out to meet the yacht in the middle and then do what they call the coopering. So transferring the drugs from the seafaring huge boat into the rib, which then goes back into Mizen Head, and then they were then going to distribute the drugs and
from
all of
there
that.
up to someone's nose.
Exactly, yeah. Via a few middlemen, you know, and all of that.
But what happened?
Well, so I might get this the wrong way round because I frequently do. The engines on the rigid inflatable boat, the rib, were diesel, I think. And when they got out to sea, they needed to top up the engines, and they took fuel from the yacht that had sailed with that, and that was petrol. So they put petrol in diesel engines, right?
Stop. My mother wouldn't do it.
Yeah, exactly, right? It all went horribly wrong, right? The waves are crashing and all that kind of stuff, even though it was August, I think it was.
Yeah.
You know what the Atlantic's like off of the west coast of Ireland.
Wild.
There's a townie like me telling you, you know, right? And it all went horribly wrong. The rib got tipped up, you know, filled with water. The cocaine went into the sea. The Coast Guard were called, helicopters, the whole shebang. And it went horribly, horribly wrong for them, as you can imagine. Various people got nicked. Some got 30 years and all sorts of stuff. And, so I went out to Dunloch Bay to include it in our BBC podcast that we had running at the time about my hunt for Kevin Parle. He's a fugitive wanted for 2 murders in Liverpool.
Yes.
Because what I'd established was that there was a link between the whole cast of bad guys and the Dunloch Bay importation and somebody who I had been told at some point had harboured Kevin Parle.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So I was exploring it to kind of like highlight the links and show to the listeners the scale of criminality that the likes of Parle and those people that look after him, or did look after him, are up to. So that's why we went out there.
Have you seen the film Young Offenders?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's great crack.
Inspired by the Dunloch Bay conspiracy.
They go looking for it. Yeah.
Inspired by it.
Okay, well, let's wind it back a little bit. Peter, let's place that accent. Where exactly are you from?
I'm born and raised in a place called Bleksley in southeast London.
Okay.
It's not the Badlands of Peckham or Brixton. It's one of those leafy suburbs. It's the outermost London borough before it nudges into Kent.
But as a young lad, you've spoken before that you could have gotten yourself into a bit of trouble, but your life took a turn and you ended up in the police force.
Yeah, I was a bit of an errant idiot kid, really, to be honest with you. My dad, who I didn't like, he was a violent alcoholic. He was a horror. He left when I was about 10 or 11.
Okay.
Wow.
And thereafter, my dear mum, who's still with us, bless her, 94.
Wow.
She was working hard every day to put the food on the table and a shirt on my back.
Yeah.
My older sister went off to nursing. And I was just sort of left alone as a kid. If I didn't fancy going to school, I'd put my uniform on. Mum think I'd gone. She'd leave for work before me.
Yeah.
You know, and as soon as everybody was out of sight, that was it. Back indoors, get changed, down to bookies. You know,
From what age?
About 13, 14.
Okay,
You
that is young.
Yeah. And essentially, I wasted my education. I managed to cobble together a couple of O-levels, as they were called in those days. A matter of some regret, I have to say. I think education is a great thing. If you get your head down and you study and you get qualifications, it does make life easier for you.
Yeah.
Particularly now in the modern age. I think...
They say knowledge is never wasted.
Yeah.
And then how did you end up in the police force?
Well, I came home one day. I'd left school at 16, got out there as soon as I could, much to the school's delight. Just tell you the story, right? So my last day at school, I've gone down a pub at lunchtime. I'm 16, right?
Lad. Peter, you're drinking at 16.
Three of us. We've gone down a pub. Yeah. But
Was it easy to get served?
3 light and bitters and I'm bollocks, right? Okay? Right? I am kind of bladdered. So we get back into school. We ditched the blazers and all that sort of stuff. But the publican knew what the coup was and we weren't making too much of a nuisance of ourselves till we got back to school, right? And then it's flour and it's pens writing on faces and shirts and all that stuff, creating carnage. And the deputy head was a guy called Mr. Mason. And I'd had to sit on my own at a desk outside his office a lot in the previous couple of years because I was getting slung out of this class and slung out of that class. Anyway, he came up to me. I'm complete mess. He said, Bleksley, he said, you came to this school with nothing. He said, you leave this school with next to nothing. You are a nothing. You will become a nothing. Get out of my school.
Wow.
And so I went, all right, cheerio, ta-da. Off I trotted. And I'd like to think that in some regards I've proved him wrong because I did end up going in the cops and, you know, and I've had over 20 years in the media writing books and plays and that sort of stuff. So he wasn't entirely right. He was right in some regards, but essentially I think I managed to finally to prove him wrong.
Well, you definitely did, yeah.
Yeah, obviously you didn't go... and at what age did you become a cop?
Well, I joined the cadets at 17.
Okay.
So I left school at 16, went and got a job in Woolworths, you know, the department sort of shop, you know. Loved that, working in the warehouse, absolutely loved that. My mum had loftier ambitions for me. So when I came home one night from work, to my horror, there was this enormous uniformed police officer sitting in the lounge of the flat that I shared with my mum.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And I thought, fuck me, what am I going to get nicked for?
What have I done?
Right, yeah. And as good fortune would have it, he was there to give me a bit of a careers talk and bit of a life talk about, you know, come on, grow up, join the police cadets. You can play loads of sports, you'll do studying, you'll get disciplined, and then when you join the old bill, you know, you can be virtually anything you want. So why not do it? Regular pay, decent pension at the end of it. Come on, shape up, kid. Pulls the forms out and go sign here. And I did. And literally a few short weeks later, I walked through the gates of Hendon Cadet College, as it was then, because I was 17, not old enough to be a PC, with a haircut that I thought was short enough. I soon found out it wasn't.
Did it make you shave your head or what?
I had to go for another haircut. Yeah. And it kind of transformed my... I discovered discipline. And most importantly, I discovered self-discipline. Okay. I think that was the real key.
That was the making of you.
Yeah, so what? Bull your boots, as we called it. Polish your boots. Make them shiny. Learn how to iron your shirts, your trousers. Get up on time. Get fit. Do all the PT work and all that sort of stuff. And study in the classroom. And
when you were, when you were a cop then, where were you stationed?
Peckham, South East London.
What was it like?
Well, if I thought I was a bit of a Jack the Lad, you know, from my days in the bookies and all of that, in leafy Bexley Heath, so I thought I was, I was all right. Well, when I got to Peckham, I discovered what a complete marshmallow I was. Right, okay.
We
'Cause
know
there
Peckham
was-
from Only Fools and Horses.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Full of characters that inspired that show and some proper hard nuts. Many of whom were villains, some of whom were just very tough people.
And what age are you? You're 18, 19?
18.
18.
18,
Out in the
yeah.
beat.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
young.
Yeah, it is. They weren't supposed to let you out onto the beat until your 19th birthday. So you joined at 18 and a half. You then have 4 months of training.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't really go out onto the street till your 19th birthday. But I'd been out on the streets as a police cadet because I spent some months at a police station as a 17-year-old glorified T-boy, basically. But I'd been out on the streets, and I jumped on a couple of burglars and done all of that. And I drove the inspector mad, and in the end he just said, "Oh, go out there," clearly.
So then you're on the beat in Peckham as an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
That's got to be scary, is it?
Well, it was a very different time. It wasn't scary. I relished it and I loved it. It was, I can't sugarcoat it. There was a lot of racism within the police. Policing wasn't by consent if you were unfortunate enough to come from a minority ethnic community.
Yeah.
It was imposed upon you. Young black men were fitted up and beaten up because
Jesus.
some people absolutely relished in it. I thought it was actually a bit easier and you'd have a bit more of a straightforward life if you actually found some evidence rather than making it up. And do you know what? In Peckham, it wasn't that difficult to find the evidence. So why the fuck they were fitting people up, I genuinely don't know. If you looked that hard enough, you would find it.
Find the evidence.
It's not like there wasn't any crime, but they still insisted on fitting up people whose faces didn't fit or they wanted to
Fucking
pick on. So that went on until inevitably in 1981, Brixton blew up, the Brixton Riots of 1981, important historical events.
So for people, some of our listeners are a bit too young, maybe don't remember that.
Yeah.
Would you tell us about the Brixton Riots?
Certainly Brixton, South East London. Brixton's division bordered Peckham's division, where I was based, another area with a large minority black, predominantly Caribbean community.
Brixton.
Because all the parents had come over
Yeah.
during the Windrush generation. When employment figures were low and they wanted people to drive buses and do other sorts of jobs, shiploads of people were brought over from the Caribbean and they settled in places like Brixton and Notting Hill in London. And by now, in the late 70s, their kids are growing up.
Yeah.
And there was rampant racism against these black people by so many police officers. I've often said, not with any pride and not in any way trying to crack a gag because I'm not, but racism wasn't institutionalised. Racism was compulsory. It was how people acted within the police. From what I saw, so many of them.
Did you feel under pressure to kind of go along with it?
I did,
you're
like
young
a
guy.
stupid little dick.
Yeah.
Right? I was influenced by it. I was moved by it. And for a while, shamefully, regrettably, I was shaped by it.
Yeah.
Yes, I was. Yeah. Appallingly so.
As you say, you're 19 going into such a massive institution, like where there's a set way of doing things. It's hard for you to say no at that age to, as you say, like big officers who do things a certain way. And how did it kind of manifest itself?
Well, eventually, foolishly, what happened in Brixton, because there was a crime which was coming to prominence, which was called mugging. It's robbery, basically, where women of all ages would be robbed of their purses or their handbags. And it was seen as being a crime committed exclusively by young black men.
Okay.
Right.
Now,
And that was the way the media, or it was
that was
said
the way
in-
the media, the police and everybody portrayed it. And there was evidence
certain-
to support that, but it wasn't universal.
Yeah.
There was evidence to support that. However, the media had an agenda to focus on it. The police decided that they needed to do something about it. And in Brixton, they launched Operation Swamp. Now, what happened with Operation Swamp was just about every spare police officer they could muster got posted into Brixton, and there was an expression that if it moved, you stopped it.
Right.
So people couldn't walk 10 yards down the street without being stopped and searched.
Wow.
And of course, it was the young black men. that were having this imposed upon them. And of course, the resentment grew and the resentment grew and grew and grew. And then Easter weekend in April, I'm in a van load of cops in Camberwell. We were on a divisional support unit at the time. And a shout goes up in Brixton. We're only a mile or so away from that for urgent assistance. We thought we'd have a lump of that. Go to Brixton. And Friday afternoon, the place was simmering. What had happened was a young black man had been stabbed in the back. And in order to try and stem the bleeding, a police officer had knelt over the wound. Oh. That had been construed by people, some people, not perhaps surprisingly, as to be a forceful arrest, as opposed to trying to save his life. And all the resentment started to come out and come out and come out and come out.
Yeah.
And on the Friday night, there was a bit of bottle throwing, bit of brick throwing, bit of a standoff. We all got called into Brixton Police Station, and then a couple of hours later got sent out to just patrol in our vehicles in a never-ending loop, going up Roughton Road, which was known as the front line, where a lot of the young black men lived. And we just patrolled stupid. It was just the most stupid policing decision ever, because all it did was antagonise people. We couldn't get out the vehicles and stop them, and we were told not to or do anything.
Yeah.
But we were just there as an ever-present presence, irritating people, and irritating people.
And you become the focal point of all their frustration. They need to take it out on somebody, and you're right there in a police car.
You know, and we saw people carrying crates of milk bottles down into basements, and then we saw people carrying great big kind of like jerry cans down into the basements, and we knew what was going on. They were making petrol bombs.
Jeez.
But we couldn't get out and do anything about it.
Jesus Christ.
The following day, Brixton burnt, basically. It just all kicked off big time.
And you must look back now at the way that it was handled. And even like riot police are now are so differently trained and have such different gear to back then.
Yeah, but essentially, they talk about the policing model in the UK being policing by consent. It wasn't policing by consent back then. It was imposed upon these people. There was rampant illegality going on in that some of these people were being fitted up and beaten up. The stop and search was just blanket and targeting everybody, no matter what. And so the resentment grew, and you can't keep a population down forever.
Yeah.
Eventually, something's going to give, and people will fight back. Of course they would. I guess all of us would fight back if we were oppressed. You know, it's in the human psyche, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's in the human psyche. We don't want to live lives of being oppressed. And it was a huge, huge moment for me that weekend, because I got home on a Saturday. I didn't go back on the Sunday. It kicked off again on the Sunday a bit. But when I got home, I took a long, hard look in the mirror, because people had wanted to kill me for the uniform that I wore and what it represented. They literally wanted to kill me, and my colleagues, of course.
Yeah.
And I took a very, very long, hard look at myself, what I'd become in those short 3 years from going to Peckham, the kind of vile, racist piece of garbage that I'd become. And I realised that, number one, I wanted to get out of uniform, because I didn't want to be a symbol of that repression anymore. And actually, what really was the number one, I fundamentally had to change as a human being. And from that day on, I've never uttered a racist word, committed a racist deed, or had a racist thought.
Drew a line in it.
I learned the error of my ways, got out of uniform, became a detective, and so it was a significant change in my life.
Can we ask you about then going undercover?
Yeah.
You took getting out of uniform to a whole other extreme. You couldn't have got further out of uniform.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I had to go and do 3 years as a regular detective in a CID office.
Yeah.
In the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, don't you know?
Nice.
Very, very different from Peckham.
Just fashion crimes.
And accent crimes. Yeah. And, very different, exposed to a lot of different types of crimes and people and all of that, because police is one of those jobs where you never stop learning if you're moving around and dealing with different stuff. But then my next ambition was to join a Scotland Yard squad, because that was the pinnacle if you were a career detective rather than taking promotion. And I was fortunate enough to be approached by the Central Drug Squad. And at the age of 25, you know, with my chest puffed out and my shoulders pulled back, and I was young, fit and fearless, I walked through the revolving doors at New Scotland Yard, and not long after that, I thought, yeah, I'll have a go at this undercover malarkey. I reckon I can do that.
What was your first assignment?
Well, the first undercover job that I was really exposed to, although not a part of, went horribly wrong. And it was a very steep learning curve for me. There was 3 undercover officers, 2 males and a female, and they were negotiating to buy a few kilos of heroin from these bad guys. And what had happened during the negotiations, which I discovered later on, was that they'd asked the female police officer to strip off to prove that she wasn't wearing a wire. Okay. They'd done the same to the men. They'd rubbed them down, made them take their clothes off and all that sort of stuff. But the undercover woman wouldn't take her clothes off.
Was she wearing a wire?
I don't know, but it's utterly irrelevant, basically, as far as I see it, because, all right, if you were wearing a wire, well, more fool you. You shouldn't have put yourself in that position. And if you weren't, then why not strip off? These are criminals. Yeah. You've got to remember, you are dealing with people that might operate with a different moral compass to you.
That's exactly, I think your morals go out the window when you're in this situation.
Yeah, you know, when in Rome, do what the Romans do.
And what happened?
Well, she didn't. So the bad guys thought, these are a bunch of patsies here. These are a bunch of people we can rob. They're not proper hard-nosed criminals, drug dealers. They're idiots. So when the 3 of them, the 3 undercover cops, turned up in the car park at Regent's Park, just opposite London Zoo, with £70,000 in a holdall, the bad guys sidled up to their car. Yeah, the driver wound the window down. Notice how long ago this was. Window winders on cars. Don't know if you remember those kids.
The good old days.
Ask your elderly relatives. We used to have to wind the window down. Personally, I just looked at it as exercise. So they wound the window down, and the geezer's got a little squeegee bottle which would contain lemon juice usually.
Right.
But they filled it with ammonia. So they just go squirt that straight into the driver's eyes, the undercover cop.
Yeah.
So he's screaming and shouting because he thinks he's been blinded. They get the keys out of the car, the bad guys, go round to the boot, pop the boot open and leg it with the 70 grand.
Jesus.
That's police money, government money. Holy
money.
shit.
Fuck. Yeah.
That is and where are you at this stage?
Not to mention, well, I was lying on the floor of the top deck of a double-decker bus because we were part of the arrest team. Right, so we had to lay on the floor out of sight.
Yeah.
With covert radios in, so we got earpieces in.
Yeah.
So we can bail out and nick the bad guys when they turn up. Okay, so of course, in this absolute mayhem that came about of the ammonia, the screaming, the nobody really know what's going on, I legged it off the bus and chased a bloke that I could see disappearing off into the distance. Well, back then, obviously, I was a lot fitter,
just a fit guy.
Fitter. I was half my age and half my weight, and I've gone legging it after this bloke, and he's gone into a slightly sort of not wooded area because that conjures up something like a woods, but it was an area with trees.
Okay.
But a man-made area, if you will, on the outskirts of Regent's Park, and I've gone legging it after him, and I'm kind of shouting and hollering as I'm catching up with him. He then stops, turns round and pulls a gun.
Oh, shit.
Right? And levels that at me. Well, at that point, I built up such a head of steam that there was no way I could stop. You know what I mean? I couldn't stop and leg it the other way.
Yeah.
So I just did a little bit of as much as I could, a kind of, a sidestep, and then just clattered into him. The gun went flying. He hit the deck. I kept hold of him. And then we found out later it was a 2-2. One of my colleagues recovered it. So he got nicked, he got charged. They all got nicked, all the robbers got charged. But of course, in the pandemonium afterwards, they couldn't find the 70 grand.
Oh, stop.
Oh, no way.
Okay, so there's a bit of a debrief all on the hurry up. Will you take him to that, Nick, and you take him to that, Nick, and all that sort of stuff. And the detective inspector, who was fairly new to the squad, said later on, he said, I discovered that day that adrenaline runs down your leg. Because he could see his career just going down the tubes.
Yeah.
What happened was one of the bad guys had grabbed the holder with a 70k, legged it into the zoo, right, and hidden it in a skip under a tarpaulin. As he's legging it through the zoo, there's a skip with a tarp on it, stuck the bag under there, carried on legging it, of course with the intention of coming back later when the dust has settled and we've all buggered off and recovering the 70 grand. So we got it back. The bad guys got nicked.
You found the money anyway.
Yeah. Got the bag back. So they were all very, very grateful. And I sort of went, well, you know what? I think I'll have a go at this, and they ain't going to rob me.
You mentioned there a guy pulled a gun on you.
Yeah.
I mean, you've obviously been in some hairy situations over the years. What's the worst?
What's that like? Yeah.
Well, I still bear the scar here on my neck where I got stabbed in the neck one day.
That's a bad place to get stabbed, Peter.
Yeah, it wasn't great. I was pretty fortunate actually that it wasn't a lot more serious. That could have been, even more unpleasant than it was, but that was fine. Didn't require surgery, just needed stitching up in the end. But I didn't know that as I was sat down on the pavement by a colleague, scarf wrapped round my neck, blood coming out, and waiting for the ambulance. I simply didn't know how bad that was. So I kept my breathing very shallow because I didn't want to inhale blood and that kind of stuff.
Oh, my God.
But when I got to hospital, so I'm wheeled into the hospital, and this very large, forthright, wonderful female doctor said, right, let's have a look. And she took the scarf off, had a look at the wound and went, nothing more than a flesh wound. Needle, sutures, whatever it was, she said. And a few minutes later, she got me all patched up. Go on in, off your way, off you go.
Oh, my God.
I've never been so relieved, to be told by a very forthright doctor that it was just a flesh wound.
If you're undercover, like what are you thinking? If you're going into a real difficult situation, you're talking about drugs, arms dealing.
Yeah.
Before you go into a room and you're going to have to lie to people face to face, like what's going through your head?
Get home safely.
Yeah.
Yeah, get home at the end of the day.
But you can't be worried. You can't be shaking. You can't. You know what I mean?
No, of course. But you've got so much adrenaline flowing through you. You really have. One of the biggest challenges actually is to control that adrenaline, so that essentially, when I'm in a boozer or a flat or a car or whatever situation it is, and I'm negotiating with the bad guys, yes, the adrenaline's going round and round and round and round and round, but actually I have to take a deep breath and harness that adrenaline, actually kind of use it to slow everything down and keep myself very much under control, keep my words, my actions, my language very deliberate, so that I don't essentially lose the plot, say something daft, jeopardise the operation, or put myself in even greater danger.
Because you're playing a character.
Exactly. But a character that was pretty close to me.
Yeah.
Because that's the secret, isn't it? Because the easiest lies to tell are the ones that are closest to the truth.
You don't want to be going in like doing an Irish accent or something and having to keep that up for like...
No.
I'm here to buy the missiles, boy.
How long would, say, a mission be as such, like say the drug squad? Like, how do you start off? Because obviously you can't just walk in one day and be like, hi, I'd like to buy 4 kilos of coke. You've obviously got to ingrain yourself with these lads first. Well,
there was no template that you could lay over any two operations. Every single one was the same. I did operations that lasted for months, and I did operations where I'd meet a geezer at lunchtime and we'd do the trade in the evening. So you could never tell. It depended upon the criminals, their availability of the parcel, whatever it was they were selling to me. There were so many variables.
How deep undercover, Peter, do you have to go in turn? Like, because I imagine
there's probably times you really have to.
Not that I know like any drug dealers, but I would imagine that the type of people who would maybe sell it would maybe use it.
Well, there's that old phrase: "Never get high on what you supply."
But has that been your experience of it?
No, some people are bang on it. I mean, some people are only dealing to fund their own habit. But many of the dealers that I met with and negotiated with wouldn't ever go anywhere near an illegal drug. They were strictly business people that wanted to make money. And of course, they're a completely different sort of breed of people from the guy that's doing 3.5 grams a day of cocaine up his vehicle, and needs a couple of grand a week to fund his own habit. Yeah.
Like, how far would you go in a situation if you're sitting down with a guy and he's like, you know, oh, do you want a bit of this, or you know?
Yeah, if he doesn't trust you, you need to like prove yourself.
Well, yeah.
like that female cop who didn't take her clothes. Like, you know what I mean? How far would you have to go?
I've slept with a woman once who I was negotiating with. You know, it was kind of like a spontaneous sort of thing. It hadn't been pre-planned, but I think it would have been a deal breaker. She'd have rumbled me if I'd have, you know, kind of walked away. Yeah. We went out for dinner. And that was a job where I've been asked publicly, because it all went in my autobiography, which was published over 20 years ago. Yeah. And one very astute BBC journalist said to me, because I went on a bit of a publicity rounds telling people about the book when it came out, and he said to me, and it was one of the first and best kind of question I think I've ever been asked in thousands of media interviews. He said to me, you say on page 81 or wherever it was that you had cocaine-fueled sex with a woman. He said, do you regard that as a legitimate law enforcement tactic? Decent question. Yeah. Very fair, reasonable question. And my answer, in essence, was, well, the ends justified the means, because the guy that I was negotiating with and that she'd introduced me to was working at an embassy at the time and was using diplomatic channels to smuggle the drugs into the UK. Wow. And in all likelihood, if I hadn't launched that operation, convinced him I was a bad guy and got him locked up, he'd probably still be doing it today.
Yeah.
Only probably on an even bigger scale. And that was a right question to ask, and it wasn't premeditated. She was an active participant in this drugs conspiracy. In fact, the deal actually went down on a Saturday morning, so the guy got nicked and the cocaine recovered on a Saturday morning. She got nicked. I wasn't with her, but she got nicked in the flat. And she'd actually thought that as part of my persona that we were going away for the weekend to celebrate after the drugs had been, you know, I'd bought the drugs and moved them on and all of that. So she baked some hash cookies, right, which she had in a little Tupperware box, right? And she had a couple of grams of cocaine in her purse, right? And she had her overnight bag because she thought we were going, you know.
We're going to have a right weekend here.
Right weekend. Well, you can imagine my colleagues, can't you? Yeah. Later on go, oh, yeah, you were going to have a proper weekend with her, weren't you?
Lads, could you not nick her on Monday? Yeah. Fuck's sake.
Was there ever a doubt in your mind being an undercover cop? Like, there was a threat to your life? It was picked up in Boston, was it? Or like a phone tap?
Yeah. I mean, and it basically signalled the end of my career, basically. I got drafted in to help with an undercover operation that had already started. And it had an input from the FBI in the States, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency in the States, the Gala Chicana.
Whoa. They're all in on it.
It was a huge operation with many a twisted tale of corruption, terrorism allegations, threats, and all that sort of stuff. And I got pulled into it to be the drug tester and weigher and basically, you know, the muscle that would move the gear about and all of that.
Undercover,
yeah. And it ended up, to cut a very long story short, with £4 million worth of heroin being delivered to me by a bloke at a hotel in Gatwick, at the airport. And I spent many hours weighing and testing it because there were 30 parcels of it. At the time, it was the biggest land seizure of heroin in the UK.
Wow.
Did all that, weighed it, tested it, and then eventually me and the bad guy, we left and we were arrested by armed police at the lift as we were going down to the bar for what he thought was going to be a celebratory drink. There were simultaneous arrests in London. There'd been hundreds of thousands of pounds shown at a safety deposit box, you know, which was going to be the money to pay for the consignment. And it was it was a very good operation in regards of the amount of drugs that were seized and the arrests, but there was a lot of infighting between all these different agencies, which is so often the case when you end up basically with senior people from multiple law enforcement agencies having a willy-waggling contest, because that's kind of what it came down to. And unfortunately, it was me who suffered, because a report was drawn up for the Deputy Commissioner of the Met, to take to a meeting when he was going to go and negotiate with all these other, the customs, the FBI, the guards, etc., etc. And that report, number one, had my real name in it, which it shouldn't have had, right? Undercover, you get allocated a number.
Yeah.
All that should have gone in there was my number. It didn't, my real name. I've got a very unusual surname.
Yeah.
At the last count, there's only about 14 of them in the UK. And I've fathered most of them. No. Only 3 of them, right? Only 3. And so, first mistake, my real name goes in the report. Second mistake, that report is printed off and taken out of a police station. Third mistake, that report is left unattended in the back of an unmarked police car. The driver of that car, the author of the report, then goes shopping. And, ladies and gentlemen, we all know what happens next, don't we? Correct. That car gets broken into and that report gets stolen. There is already a pre-existing plot to kill me, because the bad guys have worked on the theory that if they kill me, they kill the evidence. And they're pretty right, to be perfectly frank. So I get a very panicked phone call saying, don't go home, move into a hotel, get your girlfriend to pack an overnight bag, get to Scotland Yard at 9 o'clock the following morning. I get there at 8 o'clock. Because I'm a detective, you know what I mean?
You're always early.
You're always early. My mate says, have you seen this? And he holds up a copy of the report, or the briefing note, as it was called. I said, no. He said, right, there's a copy. You better keep hold of that. You're probably going to need it. Locks me in a room. I read it. Couldn't believe what I was reading. And by the close of play that day, it had been decided that I had to abandon my home, my identity, the life I loved, and be parachuted into the witness protection unit.
Wow. So your girlfriend went with you?
She did.
Yeah.
And much to my regret, I didn't handle things very well when I was in witness protection.
Can I ask you where you get sent? Like, do you get a choice or anything?
I had a choice of 3 properties and we had a weekend to make our decision.
All outside the UK?
No, funnily enough, no, they weren't that far. I ended up moving 12 miles away from where I lived.
Stop.
No,
Is that not cutting it a bit fine, Peter?
Well, they still wanted me to work every day. They still wanted me to work undercover as well.
Jesus.
Under the same character, the same fake name?
Well, different names.
Yeah,
Obviously,
yeah.
I had multiple identities and always had identities in the system ready to use if one got burnt. Because if I had to go to court and give evidence in one particular name, then that identity would get burnt, and I'd just go to the office and pick up the new one.
Yeah.
And the passports, the credit cards, the driving licences were already there. And so there I am living in this hideout. It wasn't a home, with my girlfriend at the time. I come down in the morning and there is the mail on the doormat. That's the first reminder that I am this identity living in this hideout. I then get ready and go to work, and that was my favourite hour of the day, because I sit in the car, I can turn the radio on, and for an hour I can be Peter Bleksley.
Yeah.
Until I get to work, and then one of the bosses would go, Blex, got another undercover job come in. It's ideal for you. So by 11 o'clock in the morning, I could have been 3 different people. Jeez. And this went on day after day after day.
And how does it affect you?
Well, I was conspiracy theorising about how all this shit had come to pass. This report, my name in it, being stolen, etc., right? The constant fear of a bullet in the back of the head, just ever present.
What did you say it was? £400 million worth of heroin?
4 million it was.
£4 million worth of heroin. So somebody's pissed at you.
Yeah. There was a lot of people really, really unhappy. And they were all tasty and they were all connected, and they were probably quite capable of carrying out what they wanted to carry out.
It's incredible because in 2001 you released your autobiography, The Gangbuster. So how did you get out of witness protection and be able to release an autobiography?
Okay, well, I went out of witness protection via a 3.5-week lock-in stint in a psychiatric ward because I became so unwell.
Yeah.
I had a catastrophic mental health breakdown. I'd drunk too much, I'd smoked too much, I'd conspiracy theorised much too much, and I'd got really, really unwell to the point where I seriously assaulted somebody who I would have regarded as a friend, and I realised that I was a danger not only to myself but to others. Unfortunately, I was taken to hospital and they saw how unwell I was. that signified the beginning of the end of my police career, which limped on for a couple of years thereafter. And then I found myself in 2000 on the scrap heap of life. Remember, I'd flunked my education.
Yeah.
I had no trade. All I knew was being a cop. I wasn't a chippy, a sparks, a plasterer, or anything like that.
And there was no opportunity for you to do something else within policing?
No. They wanted rid of me.
Okay.
Because I'd been aggravation.
Yeah.
Not only had I gone in witness protection, but then I'd got ill. And this hadn't happened before. They'd never seen it happen before. So there was no template to follow. They were flying by the seat of their pants, which is why I kind of cut them some slack. But I think somebody in a senior position should have at some stage have gone, right, what's the long game here?
Yeah.
And nobody did.
Because does working undercover for years must surely take its toll on you?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Like stressful. You're finding yourself in situations, if I mess up here, I'm going to get killed. You could have guns pointed at you, dealing with, hairy types of people.
Yeah, undercover policing has a shockingly high casualty rate. It really does. Yeah, if you don't get physically hurt, then psychological damage can be considerable. Some people manage to, do it for many, many years and are not affected, but a considerable number are.
So many things we could ask you. Your opinion on modern policing?
In the UK, it's in a bit of a catastrophic state at the moment, I'm afraid.
Okay, what are you thinking?
When we have police officers kidnapping, raping and murdering people, and we have police officers who are serial rapists over a period of 20 years, when there are many, many other officers being arrested and appearing in front of the courts on a weekly basis, there's a problem. There's a big, significant problem. I am frequently commenting on various broadcast outlets in the UK about British policing. I don't shy away from the truth, and that makes me hugely unpopular with a lot of former and some serving cops. They don't like the truth. Well, I will not be cowed by a vile and racist hate mob, despite all the shit that they send my way. And they are utterly pathetic, really, really pathetic. And the kind of hysterical thing is, the more they shout and scream and snitch to the broadcasters, right, this will be a typical tweet. Dear at BBC, dear at Sky News, dear at ITV, and so on and so on and so forth. How can you have such a revolting man, blah, 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 blah. And the more they do that, the more my phone rings. So you keep carrying on, your tossers.
But the
it needs
state's
changing.
Approach to policing, is there things you'd like to see changed?
Yes, I want real policing. I mean, what do the public want from their police, essentially? And now, I will accept criticism if I'm oversimplifying things, but actually, this, from my experience in everybody I speak to, is true. What do people want from their police? They want them to keep the streets safe.
Yeah.
That is absolutely crucial. They want to see police officers, not merely in a car at 70 mile an hour with the blues and twos going, right? They are not able to engage with their police as they go, right?
You say it's important to still be out walking the beat.
They want to see them. They would like, ideally, to know the name of a local officer. They want a telephone number they can ring that doesn't give them option 7 for tearing your hair out. Option 9, break this phone. They don't want any of that. They want to be able to speak to people, engage with people. So number 1, they want the streets to be safe. Number 2, when crime is committed, the public, in my opinion, want it investigated promptly, properly and professionally. They don't want to hear about crimes being classified as low level. Because if you have your £700 bicycle stolen, and believe you me, lots of people buy bikes for 700 quid, right?
Yeah.
I mean, astonishing, but it's true. And that is your mode of transport to and from work every day. It is not low level when that bike gets nicked.
Yeah.
Get it? Mr. Police Officer, Mrs. Police Officer, it is not low level. So investigate it. And if you possibly can, find the perpetrator. Which brings me on to the third point. So number 1, street safe. Number 2, investigate crime. Number 3, lock bad people up. Now, I know there's a lot of complexities within policing. Counter-terrorism work, for example. Covert work. Might have done a bit of that myself, right? And so on and so forth. But that's what the public want. There is undoubtedly a huge problem with attitudes, misogynistic attitudes within policing, which we see not only courtesy of their monsters who are getting locked up, and another British cop got locked up last week for 1 year and 4 months for punching a woman in the street that he'd been in a relationship with. Okay,
Jesus.
We have a proper problem over here that needs properly addressing.
Why do you think sentencing is too lenient?
Sentencing is a matter for the judges and the courts and their guidelines and all of that. And I, generally speaking, try to swerve that if I can, because it's not anything I can alter. But snapping at the heels of the police and making myself ever so unpopular is something I can do and frequently do. To give you an example, people approach me through a variety of ways and tell me tales of modern policing. A woman contacted me just a couple of weeks ago and said a woman wanted to report an allegation of a sexual offence being made against her.
Okay.
Engaged with a couple of male officers, and they in turn called up female officers who had expertise in reporting sexual offences, right, as you should do.
Yeah.
They called the vehicle that the female women were coming into the bra car. Right?
Jesus.
Okay.
Now, that's just utterly disrespectful and gives you a complete insight into their mindset, which has to be that of a misogynist. And on the same shift, right, the inspector who was in charge of that shift is a woman. Now, here in the Met, the vehicle that is in charge of a particular shift, whatever you would call it, carries the call sign, for example, Alpha 1. Bravo 1, Charlie 1, right? It's the one that thing, right? Okay, so the inspector is coming. They referred to her car as Tampon 1.
Jesus Christ. That's what you're dealing with.
Right, so it's not just the rapists and the murderers, it's the people with that mindset they've got to get across. And it really can't be that difficult to instill into everybody that when you're a cop, no matter what, do the right thing.
There you go.
I know it's challenging, I know it's difficult, but if you have that in your head 24/7, which doesn't mean to say when you're off duty you can't sing and dance and
have a good time. Yeah.
all of that you can, but just do the right thing.
Peter, before we finish, your podcast.
Well, that's on pause at the moment, but if people want to go and listen on BBC Sounds to Manhunt Finding Kevin Parle, that tells of my hunt, which is ongoing for a man wanted in Liverpool for 2 separate murders, Kevin Parle. 6'6", I've been told at various times. He had an Irish girlfriend.
Wow.
And as the great Nicola Tallant said to me, if he's got an Irish girlfriend, her mammy will know. So maybe links between the Dunloch Bay importation and somebody who did harbour Kevin Parle at some point, I'm sure. So plenty of links. Please go and have a listen to that. We will be bringing it back as soon as we possibly can. But first and foremost, I need to have a word with you two gentlemen.
Well.
Right. So when I was approached to come on your wonderful podcast, I thought, what a two cheeky chappy, funny guys from the Emerald Isle want with an old, fat, grey-haired, balding bloke like me on their podcast, right? But then I listened to last week's episode, which featured segments on masturbation and pissing in bottles. And I thought, now I know why I've got the gig. And you haven't asked me a question about.
We forgot he was a detective, John. How we shouldn't be surprised he did his research.
He's done his research.
Have you ever had to piss in a bottle on a job?
Yes.
Yeah. There you go.
Many, many times in the back of an observation van. Yes.
I hope you never had to wank anyone off to get a confession out to know.
I most definitely did not.
That's great. Good to hear. Good to hear.
Peter, there's so much more we could chat to you about. We'd love to have you on again because we haven't even got into. You've won BAFTAs, your playwrights, your books, the TV, so much. We'd love to have you back on.
Hope you come back on again someday.
Part 2, please, gents.
Yes, 100%. Peter Bleksley, legend. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.